hang on, if this guy was a tyrant, and we consider these two guys tyrants, what does that make this guy? It's the 250th almost anniversary of the American Revolution, and founding father James Madison had something interesting to say about tyranny that may help us out. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether one, few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elected, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Is Donald Trump a tyrant? Let's talk about it. So, calling someone a tyrant's a pretty big deal, especially when they're the president of the United States, because a lot more questions need to be asked if he is. So we probably should define terms and be careful about this. Yeah. So to start off with, Aristotle called tyranny a government that was not constrained by laws or customs. And John Locke, a famous English philosopher, said that wherever law ends, tyranny begins. And anyone in authority who exceeds the power given to him by law and makes use of the force he has under his command to continue breaking those laws and norms is also a tyrant. So tyranny is the disregard not just of laws, but also of the key customs of government, right? Of the pre-existing establishment. It is an attempt to reshape government in the image of, or towards the whim of, some powerful person or group. That sounds familiar. There are three traits in a tyrannical personality. The first one is grandiosity. The use of constant hyperbole to burnish your own ego and self-confidence. If you think about like petty dictators and how they love to wear super big-ass uniforms with like fancy hats and all sorts of like scrambled egg gold braid on them and stuff like that. Or if you think about, only I can fix it. Only I can make America great again. I'll be known as the whatever president. I'll be known most recently as the fertility president. I'm going to rename this thing Gulf of America because that's how people will remember me. I will be remembered. Look at these great things that I will create. The second is ruthlessness. This is a willingness to consolidate power by the elimination or indoctrination of rivals. And we've seen this obviously through federal purges and Doge. But interestingly, Marco Rubio provides a perfect example of the empty suit politician who's willing to shift further to the right than they already were in order to embody Trumpism. Additionally, there is no loyalty. All relationships are transactional and alliances shift as opportunities for new advantages arise, leaving old allies in the dust, shattered like broken toys on the ground. This comes from a lack of central guiding principles, whether they be political or moral or philosophical, right? Their only goal is to obtain and retain more power. And finally, insecurity. This is Trump's biggie, if you ask me. This is the denial of any fault or wrongness and an inability to hear positions counter to one's own, along with an aversion to hear any news that proves you could be or are in fact wrong, right? This, coupled with the exaltation of their own actions while creating a scapegoat to play on any failures. In other words, they build themselves up, refuse to listen to any kind of naysaying or argumentation about what they believe, and then they create a scapegoat, whether it be people eating animals or Joe Biden did everything that's wrong and we're just here to fix it or whatever, right? These are the things a tyrant feels will build a wall of impenetrability around their reputation. And in Trump's case, insecurity drives the other two a lot, I think. And it's because he's a malignant narcissist. And I don't say that lightly. I don't think you should be like diagnosing your average Joe on the street just because you've met them once or twice, but the man's been in the public sphere for 25 years at this point. It's fair to say that he requires constant narcissistic supply to function because he has impaired self-esteem, an antisocial personality disorder, and a fragile ego. And because of this, he builds a wall of confidence, boasting, and self-flattery around himself while craving attention, respect, and constant admiration to stave off the feeling that he is, and I think he is, undesirable. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but 200 health professionals have made this claim, stating that he shows a lifetime pattern of failure to conform to social norms and laws, repeated lying, reckless disregard for the safety of others, and a lack of remorse. All of this makes him deceitful, destructive, deluded and dangerous. Ripe ground if there ever was for a tyrant to grow. Taken on top of that, it is especially galling the reports of him during January 6th taking pleasure in the pain inflicted on others, as firsthand accounts of his reactions of that day show that he watched with glee as the Capitol was stormed and continued to rewind and watch his favorite parts over and over and over again. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas said, "As nightfall does not come all at once, neither does oppression. In both instances, there is a twilight when everything remains seemingly unchanged, and it is in such twilight that we must be most aware that change is in the air, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of the darkness." So, you can't just be a narcissistic asshole and be a tyrant, right? There has to be actions involved to create the tyranny. You can be a dick and not be a tyrant all day long. What the big one that Aristotle and Plato talk about is using government for self-fulfillment, corruption, essentially. And I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration is the most corrupt presidential administration, at least since Teapot Dome, if you know your history, and probably possibly in history of the United States, maybe, I don't know. But it's very, very corrupt. They raised $500 million on crypto coins and then launched another coin after that, and then decided to peg another coin to the dollar. This is obviously a conflict of interest, right? And not to mention that he sells multi-million-dollar seats at Mar-a-Lago for CEOs to come see him, right? He is using the White House as a profit-making venture. You can't get more corrupt than that. But it gets worse. It's not just about the greed and the graft. It's also about undercutting civil society, right? He's trying to destroy the norms of what democracy in the United States, like civil life, is, right? He calls for judges' impeachment. He works to undercut the academic freedom of universities. He's constantly looking to create division and hatred in the forms of misogyny, misogynoir, transphobia, which, when it's against trans women, is also a form of misogyny, and racism. And he has this complete and total rejection of fact in favor of whatever needs to be true for him that day. And you are not allowed to be in power unless you live in that land of false truth with him, right? Unless you agree to live in his reality, you are no longer a part of civil society. And last but not least to me is the absolute destruction of due process with the Alien Enemies Act and whatever excuse he's using to say, no, really the Alien Enemies Act is this other thing, by destroying people's due process and disappearing them, it's 2 more times in the last 2 days, and kicking them out of the country or putting them in jails without any sort of charge. But wait, the smorgasbord of tyranny continues. He is also trying to delegitimize and undercut the power of Congress, the courts, and shred the Constitution, all at the same time. If you think about it, closing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or drilling in Anwar, or gutting U.S. aid, all of these things and the billion more that he's attempted to do through executive order directly undercut either tribal consultation or congressional approval. And on top of that, he's now trying to get Speaker Grinder Johnson acting as an agent for him in Congress to float the idea of seeking congressional approval to eliminate the federal courts so Trump can continue to pursue illegality unhindered by things like the law. On top of that, everything from attacking birthright citizenship to law firms to the Associated Press to kicking people out for birthright citizenship violates the First and the Fifth and the Sixth and the 14th Amendment, right? And then, of course, there's Doge, who has no congressional accountability whatsoever and technically doesn't even exist as a federal agency, only as this quasi-independent hatchet thing that is like a bullet in a china shop with its lax and haphazard approach to, well, everything. Tyranny is not a black or white thing. It is not I am tyrannical or I am not tyrannical, right? It is a spectrum. The United States has had elements of liberty, elements of tyranny, elements of freedom, elements of the G word, the mass unaliving. It's done it all, right? We've had those things and we've seen them in the past. Rare is it for someone to fit so well, however, into this definition so neatly. I didn't build this definition for President Trump. I did the research and asked myself the question, does he fit into it? And he is certainly grandiose, he is certainly ruthless, and he is most assuredly insecure. And I think it's fair to say that our government in the executive branch is attempting to pull power away from Congress and the judiciary and does not feel like it's constrained by laws and is certainly undercutting the customs of 250 years of the American government. That seems to me to be pretty clearly tyrannical. But what do you do about it, right? Like, yes, Donald Trump is a tyrant who is attempting to create a tyrannical government. We're not all the way there yet. Thank the whatever it is you believe in or don't. But we got to do something, right? I am reminded of a quote from Frederick Douglass, which, if you follow me, you like politics and you've probably heard. Power concedes nothing without demand. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those who they oppress. Sooner or later, they must be resisted with either words or blows. And I hatcheted that, but you understand what I mean. Douglas is saying that standing up isn't just about words, it's about actions. And we need to be taking them now because we are in that twilight that Supreme Court Justice Douglas mentioned before nightfall. And we have to see it, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to do something about it. Speaking out and bearing witness is incredibly important and is a critical function. Should we fall into deeper darkness, posts like this and from the millions of other people who use TikTok and talk about this will serve as records of the descent into that darkness. Or they will serve as records of the moment when we stood up and said, no, we are a democracy. We believe in liberty, and we will stand up for those things. And in fact, we will stand up and make the country better than it was before we got here, before Trump started being a part of the corruption, before neoliberalism took over and started destroying the labor in this country. We can stand up and do that. There's actions every day that you can take in your community. You can call and help virtually volunteer for special elections. You can show up at local rallies. You can show up at national rallies. You can work from home and just do this that I'm doing right now. Do what you can to help. And every voice needs to be a member of the chorus. And every voice is one more voice in the tidal wave that will get us to justice. Cool? Cool.